Rosewood was a small community east of the city of Cedar Key. Settled in 1847, the name comes from the reddish coloration of the cedar trees found in the area. While in 1870, a post office and train depot would be constructed, Rosewood would never be incorporated as a town. Initially, Rosewood's population was made up of both black and white settlers, but by 1890, most of the cedar trees in the region had been cut, and therefore many of the white settlers moved west to the town of Sumner that was nearby. By 1900, Rosewood was a predominantly black community, and by 1915, it had a population of 355 people. By 1920, Rosewood had a turpentine still, a sugarcane mill, 3 churches, a school, a Masonic hall, and even a local baseball team called the Rosewood Stars. Laws would be implemented in the late 19th century. Rosewood was largely self-sufficient and unaffected by segregation laws. However, this would all come to an end in January of 1923. On January 1st of 1923, a white Sumner resident by the name of Frances Taylor would be assaulted in her own home. Frances Taylor's neighbor would report that she heard a scream coming from the Taylor house, and so she grabbed her revolver and ran next door to find Taylor on the ground, beaten and bruised. Taylor would claim that a black man had assaulted her, but had not assaulted her sexually. However, rumors of sexual assault would begin to pervade throughout the region. The Taylor's laundrywoman, a Rosewood resident by the name of Sarah Carrier, had been absent that day, and the Taylor had reported that to the law enforcement, and therefore the local sheriff, a man by the name of Robert Elias Walker, would begin to raise a posse to track down the assailant. However, men would come from all over the region to join this posse, and soon over 400 men would gather in Sumner. Many of them would never be deputized. These men would use dogs to track to the home of Aaron Carrier, who was Sarah's nephew. So what they would do is they would tie Aaron to the back of a car and drag him 3 miles back to the town of Sumner. Walker would have to put him in protective custody in order to keep him from being lynched by the mob. Meanwhile, the white mob would torture and murder a man by the name of Sam Carter, who was Rosewood's blacksmith. They would then lynch his dead body. Carter would be the first victim of what would soon become the Rosewood Massacre. The mob would meet Aaron's cousin and Sarah's son, Sylvester Carrier, on the road, and they told him to leave town, but Sylvester would refuse and would begin to gather people in his home to protect as many people as possible. However, this mob would eventually surround the Carrier home. Somewhere between 15 and 25 people were taking refuge in the Carrier house when the white mob surrounded it. And Sylvester Carrier had 2 other men to help protect the people inside. However, they only had 1 gun amongst them. Rumors conflict over who shot first, but what is generally accepted is that 2 men from the white mob approached the house and shooting began. The house would be riddled with bullets, and Sarah Carrier will be shot in the head while trying to tend to the screaming children. A child would be shot in the eye, and soon the shootout would last long into the next morning. However, the shootout would end when two men kicked in the front door of the Carrier house, and both of them got shot by Sylvester. However, by the end of the gunfight, Sylvester was dead. Most of the people had escaped through the back door of the house into the swamp. However, news of the shootout of the Carrier house would make headlines across the country, and men from all over Florida would come to take part in the razing of the town of Rosewood. The white mob burned Rosewood to the ground. Many black residents were forced to flee in only their pajamas. A 50-year-old woman by the name of Lexi Gordon would be shot with a shotgun while fleeing her own home, which had been set on fire. Another man by the name of Mingo Williams would be shot on the side of the road near the county seat of Bronson, 20 miles away, while walking home from his job at a turpentine still. James Carrier, the brother of Sylvester Carrier and partially paralyzed, would attempt to return to his home, but would be found by the white mob. And they would torture him and force him to dig his own grave before murdering him. Many people around the nation were alarmed at the extreme racial violence happening in Florida. And by February, the governor, Kerry Hardy, would appoint an all-white special commission to look into the racial violence. However, none were prosecuted. While this group interviewed up to 25 witnesses, even 8 of them black, none would face any repercussions for this horrible crime that occurred. Who fled Rosewood would never return and would eventually wind up settling in places like Gainesville and Ocala. The Chicago Defender, one of America's most influential black newspapers, reported that up to 19 people died in what it described as Rosewood's race war. In 1994, those that were children when the massacre occurred would sue the state of Florida. And on May 4th, a compensation bill would be signed into law, paying the 9 remaining survivors $2.1 million and establishing a university scholarship fund for their descendants. There is no moral to this story, other than the fact that evil does exist, and it could be anywhere or in anyone, just waiting for a reason to come out.